I was just reading the WHO statement on the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, and I was trying to read it super fast because I just received it at what is 1700 here, and it's really difficult. I mean, it's full of really long words, like thrombocytopenia. I mean, a word that I know very well. It's just trying to kind of read through it and see what does it actually say. And it's basically saying go on using the vaccine, but monitor very, very carefully. Not because it's thought that these blood clotting phenomena and platelet loss, which have been reported, are due to the vaccine. But when you get these question marks asked about a vaccine, you're always not sure whether the outcome is linked to the vaccine or whether the outcome is something that could have happened by chance. And the difficult decisions are always when something is not statistically significant, but you wonder whether you should still, out of an abundance of caution, whether you should say, well, we should stop it. But I think that both the European Medicines Agency yesterday and WHO advisory people today have said, you know, in those circumstances and giving a sort of balance of risk type assessment, people should go on using this vaccine. I'm certainly hoping that I'll get offered a vaccination quite soon. And if I'm offered AstraZeneca Oxford, I shall be very happy. I think that all the vaccines available right now have shown themselves to have the kind of effectiveness you need for a vaccine, the safety profile you need for a vaccine. And so this hopefully will come my way soon. I'm just trying to navigate through various necessary steps to get it. As most of you know, I live just at the border of Switzerland and France. I'm what's called a frontalier, and navigating where to get these sorts of things is not straightforward. So, Catherine, I want to send you, if you haven't got it, the URL for this WHO statement, so that you can just have a look at it as well. It's come to you. I've just texted to you now, but if you've got it already, please be, if you don't mind, ready to also share with our colleagues on this briefing what it says, because it's something I've been waiting for the last few hours, and it's good to get it. So,
well received, David. Thank you.
You've got it, have you? Okay. Well, could you lighten up your video when you're ready, just to make a couple of points as to whether or not I was right in what it said, because I want to be absolutely correct. I was trying to read it while I was also turning on my, getting my thing ready. It was interesting experiment. Hello to everybody. It's nice to see you all. I'd like to say, first of all, to those who come quite regularly, it's super reassuring to see you here. And I want to say that we're working under the system where if you've got something to say, could you please put it in the chat? I see several of you are telling us that you're going to get the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, or you've got it already. That's great. We'll come back to that when we get halfway through, just on vaccines, because I think it's quite nice to just celebrate actually just what is happening, that really less than 15 months after this thing was really come into our consciousness, we're now not only accessing vaccines, but they're coming available all over the world. I'm absolutely overjoyed that there's been a really good rollout of COVAX, at least to lots of different countries. I'm a bit frustrated that the amounts are small, but we will see. I think that will get better. So going on saying hello, I'd like to just say to Sally Pring, thank you for joining us from Live Illustration, team members, John Atkinson and Twee and Guian. You've heard from Twee, but grateful that you're both on. Catherine Deland, you're here. And also want to stress that we have many colleagues who are assisting with the whole 4SD operation, including my brother William. He's on, and I'm very grateful. And please don't hesitate to lighten up your video if you want to talk, especially given that we've been doing so much focus on our positioning during the last few weeks. Now, let me just go into what I would like to cover, and then I'd like to, of course, give space for all of you after we've had our little session with Twee at half time. I'm going to go on looking at the state of the pandemic, and then I want to spend a bit of time digging into the situation about variants and vaccines. So it'll be those 3 V words again from me this time: virus, variant, and vaccine, because those are the issues that I really want to concentrate on. I want to spend then a bit of time talking about people and how they're responding. We've always said that people are the response, and I want to cover that. I want to go back into that if I can. And then I would like, if I may, to go into some of the global issues, picking up on what Tedros of WHO has been talking about, but also focusing on some of the issues raised by my fellow WHO special envoys, all of whom are doing some very, very interesting work right now. We just had a fabulous meeting of the special envoys, and I want, if I can, to introduce you, if I've got time, to something that's coming up, which is a possibility of a pandemic preparedness treaty. And I want to just get a little bit of a presentation from one of us on why a new treaty could be a particularly important development. What happens when we develop an international treaty? Why are people looking at an international treaty on pandemic preparedness? And what might this imply? So I hope we'll go into that on time. But I see that my friend Henk Bekkerdam, who I'm working with all the time and who's in the Netherlands, along with Ad Spijkers, Henk Bekkerdam has got to leave shortly. And Henk, you are in Netherlands, you are watching in a situation where there's really a quite tricky situation for the Prime Minister Mark Rutte, who's not in a strong situation politically, though I understand things have got a bit better in the ballot box. But Mark Rutte, on the one hand, is facing that really the current wave or surge in the Netherlands is very serious. On the other hand, he's got a population, whether it's we look at the MPs or we look at the wider population in Netherlands, not exactly overjoyed about being asked to restrict movements and all the rest. And it's difficult. You and I both believe that widespread testing using rapid tests is super important in getting societies going again and knowing where the virus is. I'd love it if you could talk a bit about rapid tests in the Dutch setting, and then you may have other comments as well. Henk, where are you? I can't even, oh, there you are. And you have the floor now. Over to you.
Thank you, David. Yes, we had elections, and I won't talk too much about this one, but very interesting. On one hand, the Dutch are indeed, David, what you said, we're very tired of all the restrictions. And at the same time, the ones who have been leading also the response, they got actually a bit of a boost in the elections, and Rutte for sure has been re-elected, etc. But for sure there's tiredness. And what I think is, and you have also been discussing it, and is that I strongly believe what is needed in many societies, they need a perspective. When will things get better? And I think in that sense, I don't think that the Netherlands have done well enough But they are now, finally, they are now better and at least start giving some hope in the future. It has been very frustrating. And David, you know that already in October, we were talking about how testing and vaccines, the new tools that we have can help to open up responsibly and more safe. Especially on the testing part, the Dutch legal system makes it very complicated for the testing component. Even though that we already have progressed quite a lot and certain things are happening, but I definitely think if there will be in the Netherlands a review, we need also to look at the legal framework in which we are operating. And I can see that some other countries have been far much more efficient to use the tools that they immediately had available. That's for now, David. Unfortunately, I had to leave today a little bit earlier.
Thank you very much indeed, Henk. It's always super interesting when we get commentary that focuses on the public health actions that are needed and the political context. And but your base point was people need to know more. And this has been my focus for the first 2 months of 2021. Paradoxically, I've actually spoken less in public while I've been working out a little bit on the narrative, and I'm still easing my way into it. But I think with Catherine DeLand and John Atkinson's and Tween Nguyen's help, I think I've got a better narrative now than I had some weeks ago. First of all, I don't want to talk about firm dates for anything. I think it's a really unfortunate habit of politicians to feel that they need to be able to give a deadline when things are going to be better, because that is the perception of what modern politics is about. I'm going to say that it won't actually be worked through in terms of dates. I think we have to think it through in terms of capabilities. What will we need in our societies to be able to coexist with this virus and to hold it at bay? What mindset do we need? What tools do we need? What systems do we need? What cash do we need? Because it's going to be a really massive effort by the human population to hold COVID at bay, and it won't be a task that we can do in just a few weeks or even months. It's going to be longer than that. It's going to be years. And in fact, because it's going to take time, I would like to say we might as well just get used to the reality that the virus is here to stay and that we are going to adapt our lives so that we can coexist with the virus without having to shut down our economies every time the numbers of cases start to surge. And so here, what I want to talk about is coexistence whilst at the same time being able to continue with life. Coexistence and continuing. I will just go into it in more detail as we get through this. Now, in terms of coexistence, what does this mean? Well, we really need to continue as humanity to understand about the virus and how it is evolving. This is a virus that is not staying totally static. It is at the same time also not evolving super fast. It is just gradually mutating, and the mutations lead to variants. And the variants are often those with slightly different properties from the original virus. And so we have variants that are of concern because of worries that they will spread more easily, cause more or different disease, and be able to escape from the protection offered by vaccines. Some of you will know that these mutations occur remarkably frequently, but they don't always lead to the survival of the virus. Quite often they kill the virus. So a mutation that leads to a variant that can survive, that's something to pay attention to. I've told you there are 4,000 variants at least that have been described. There are genes, there are sequencing efforts to find out what the actual structure of these variants are like. And we don't have a nice, neat timetable for their emergence. They just come, they tend to be referred to often disparagingly by the country or community from which they originate. And that's become a slightly bad habit because you want to blame your next door neighbor for the variant and so on. So I can't avoid mentioning some of them by name, but whenever I mention a variant in terms of its origin, that doesn't make any negative remark about the country or place or people from which it originated. It's just a reality. So there is a new variant in France that's in the area of Bretagne, and it's been associated with high death, and nobody's quite sure what it's going to lead to. There are other hotspots in France that are associated with variants. France last night, at the invitation of Mr. Jean Castex, the Prime Minister, decided to really restrict movement in about 20 departments. And I think this is a sign that in France, the situation continues to be one of major anxiety for government, with hospitals full. France is not the only European country that is feeling an uptick in cases and sick people and deaths. Just go to the Czech Republic or even in parts of Germany. And I mean, the overall situation in Europe is there are spikes of disease causing hotspots. There are surges coming up in these hotspots. There is swirling virus in some locations that's leading to high levels of sickness in hospitals and deaths. And so it's part of the pattern that I've been suggesting to you is going to go on happening for the foreseeable future. Spikes and surges and swirls will continue. But it's not just in Europe that this is happening. It's happening in Canada. It's happening in parts of the US. It's happening big time in Brazil and in Peru and in Ecuador. It's happening all over Africa. The big challenge in Africa is the very high reported case fatality rate, including in up to 30% in Lesotho, but 8% or so in South Africa, suggesting real overstretch of hospitals. There's overstretch of hospitals now building up in parts of India. There's overstretch in Indonesia, Papua New Guinea. You can't get into the hospitals in Port Moresby. According to a report that I just read, there are people who unfortunately are dying at the doorway of the hospital. And there's a lot of non-attendance at hospital in many countries now because of a perception that that's where you go to die. There's increased numbers coming up in the Middle East, particularly in North Africa, as well as in some Gulf states. And altogether, globally, there seems to be just a surge back again. After 2 months, actually, of numbers coming down from really coming down by about 30%, they've just come, they're starting definitely to go back up again. And so I have to keep saying to everybody, this pandemic is very much here. There are variants emerging all the time, and this is going to go on. I think that there's always a hope that there's been a lot of asymptomatic spread of the virus in some parts of the world associated with higher levels of immunity. We keep hoping that perhaps that explains why things damped down so much in India, particularly since the end of last year. But now with numbers coming up in India, but in slightly different locations from where it was high before, we can see that there is still an awful lot of susceptible people in that giant country. So still here, still big, and still a challenge, not gone away at all. I mean, we keep stressing that the virus is the problem. It's really important to see that. where we need to understand where the virus is. Now, so what about the vaccines? Well, my line is the vaccines help protect people from getting severely ill or dying as a result of the virus. But we don't think at the moment that vaccines will end the pandemic in the quantities that are available now. And that's really important. It will take an awful lot more vaccine to be able to end this pandemic. And during the period while the vaccines are being rolled out to end the pandemic, variants that are not protected through the vaccines that are currently available will appear. And so there will be a situation where high vaccination prevalence countries will continue to have COVID because they will be affected by variants that escape from the vaccine. You can look at me and you can say, well, how can you say definitely? How can you say will? Why don't you say you think or there might be? I'm saying will because I don't see any point in beating about the bush. I don't see any point at all in saying, well, perhaps we'll be lucky, or perhaps the vaccines that we've got at the moment will solve the thing. Because I've got no evidence to suggest that they will. I've got plenty of evidence to suggest that there will go on being variants. I've got plenty of evidence to suggest that the vaccines will have differing capacity to neutralize the variants that are emerging. So I might as well tell it like it is. That's actually led me to be a bit careful about what I say and where I say it, because there's such a hankering in many parts of the world for good news about how vaccination is going to get rid of it. I've told you that before, but I get it day in, day out, that I'm not speaking out, but when I am asked to speak, I'm saying what I expect to happen based on my understanding of what's going on. The virus continuing to spread for many more months. Variants being able to beat the vaccine. An absolute anxiety, of course, therefore, about continued suffering and death, and therefore a need to really look at what responses work against a situation like this. And I'm just going to summarize them for you again. Number one, maintaining physical distancing. Number two, wearing well-fitting face protection. Number three, extremely good hygiene, including hand washing and cough hygiene. With number four, an absolute insistence on isolation as soon as people have got symptoms, and only coming out of isolation if you've definitely got negative PCR tests or other highly reliable tests. Number five, protect people who are highly vulnerable, older people or people with other disease, and you can protect them by shielding them, or you can protect them by vaccinating them with one of these highly effective vaccines. That's people being the solution. People, through their behavior, changing the chances that individuals are affected by the virus. But people can't do this on their own. They absolutely need the support of strong community health services spread across society like a honeycomb, with people who are well trained to be able to maintain surveillance over a limited number of households and to be able to identify those who have got symptoms of illness and to be able to make sure that when they have got symptoms, they isolate. There is very rapid contact tracing. If necessary, there is movement restriction, and there is strong cooperation between local public health officers, national public health officers, and local community organizations, because as soon as you restrict movement in order to try to reduce spread, or as soon as you go for contact tracing to reduce spread, you need local actors to be engaged. You cannot do it from some miles away central point. So localize the efforts to interrupt transmission, localize the efforts to suppress outbreaks, localize any integrated response to do contact tracing or other movement restriction efforts, because without the integrated involvement of local actors, it won't work. This approach has been shown to be remarkably successful in East Asia. Of course, they're still struggling from time to time, but that's the whole point. They detect and they respond and they restrict movements and they suppress. And that's the New Zealand, Australia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand approach. And yes, there are some parts of Thailand that are in movement restriction. There are some parts of Cambodia that are in movement restriction, but that's because they've got a few cases and they're reacting very quickly. And that's what we've learned from East Asia, is you've got to get active early in order to try to stop the virus spreading right into your population. Because if you've got a lot of virus in your population, you will almost certainly enter into the seesaw of when you restrict movement in order to reduce incidence. Incidence rate comes down, like you're all seeing in the UK right now. You then release the brakes and you encourage movement to pick up again. And then after 2 or 3 weeks, cases will come up again. And then after another 6 weeks, when you've got hospitals full and lots of deaths again, you will restrict movement again in order to reduce transmission, and it will come down again. And then after a bit, you will invite movement to restart, and then the cases will come up again. And it's what we call the seesaw from restriction to freedom of movement. And when you've got large amounts of virus in your society and you're using movement restrictions or lockdown as your primary means of control, you will get the continued seesaw effect. The only way you can stop the seesaw is through having the very well-developed, widespread case detection, isolation, contact tracing, isolation, and shielding approach. I want to just add one last point. There are member states in the international system who have decided to take action and to encourage the World Health Organization to consider a more sophisticated approach to ensuring that everybody knows what they ought to be doing when there is a threat of a pandemic. And in order to do this, there is a proposal to establish a framework convention, which is an international treaty mechanism on pandemic preparedness and response. This goes beyond the existing international health regulations. It provides a means of ensuring that all the different actors know what their roles are. And it becomes not just what governments do and what the international organizations do, but in one of these framework conventions, there's space for including the expectations of others as well, different sectors of society. This work is underway, it's experimental, but I'm very, very excited about it because it offers a new way of intergovernmental arrangement to get on top of the pandemic. We'll see how it evolves, and if anybody on this call wants to speak about that, I would be very, very interested. So there you go. In summary, my top line message is the virus is the problem, and we need to understand where it is and what it's doing. Variants are making the virus much more of a problem. Vaccines are fabulous at protecting people who are most at risk, but in the amounts available at the moment, they're not going to stop the pandemic. And we need to continue tracking this virus and understanding where the variants are, picking out the hotspots, because we know that they are going to go on happening for some time to come. The responses that make a difference are the responses that people can do, because people are the solution, but people need support. And that's from public health services distributed across society like a honeycomb, backed up by well-organized, integrated local responses that can break up clusters and can support people when they isolate. Internationally, there's just the beginnings, a glimmer of a sign of new thinking about how governments could work together through perhaps having actually a convention on pandemic response. That's a very exciting new development that I know is being looked at. And with that, I now hand over to Twee, and I thank you all for listening to my opening remarks. Twee, please.
Thank you, David. So over to our little bit of an intermission trivia while our colleagues pull together all of the questions that you've kindly shared in the chat. So a bit of stretching to get ready. I will launch the poll. So we have question 1. Before the current SDG era, which were the only 2 areas of focus of the MDGs? So we have the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, but prior to that, prior to 2015, there were the Millennium Development Goals. Now there are only 2 areas of health or focus. Were they maternal and child health, HIV, AIDS, and malaria? A second option, which doesn't appear, but let's say it is just that. And then a third option, which is neglected tropical diseases and HIV, AIDS, and malaria. So the answer is one of those 3. Question 2. The WHO relies on 2 types of funding: firm membership dues or assessed contributions from the member states. And the rest comes from voluntary payments from member countries, foundations in the private sector. Gates, for example, Gavi, those sorts of organizations are big contributors. Now, what are the proportions between those 2, the firm and the voluntary payments? 10 versus 90, 20 versus 80, and or 50-50. And in the last question, which builds on what we have always talked about, is the importance of public health measures. So in your most recent wave, we've seen since the end of 2020, in your opinion, how have the public health measures in your community progressed? These are test, trace, isolate, protecting people. Please don't focus on the vaccine. Let's try and focus on the honeycomb that we talk about. I would love to hear what you, how you feel it's going where you are. So while the results come in, let's have a quick look at what Sally Pring has scribed so far. Sally, I'd love to hear from you if you don't mind taking the floor. Beautiful illustration here. What have you enjoyed illustrating so far?
Hi everybody, nice to see you all again. I feel, I just find it refreshing to hear the reality of things and not the political updates of things. I think it's the thing that is speaking to me particularly. It's strangely has the opposite effect. It's reassuring to have an understanding of what's actually going on rather than to be mollycoddled with dates of when everything's going to get back to normal. So that's the thing that strikes me the most so far. And as a beekeeper, I'm very into your honeycomb idea. So I'm doing a terrible version of a honeybee right now.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Sally.
I shall carry on. Pleasure.
We'll spotlight you again at the end of the session. Thank you so much. Now let's have a look at the results. So indeed, answer to question 1 is maternal and child health and HIV, AIDS and malaria. The answer to question 2 is indeed 20 to 80.
Where's your histogram? Where's the histogram?
Oh, here we go. There we go. So the answer for question 2 is indeed, most of you got this right, 20% firm and 80% voluntary. And then the interesting question at the end here, how do you feel the public health measures have progressed? 45% say they've stayed the same, 45% say some elements have improved, and then 2 of you have said they have gone backwards. And unfortunately, no one has said that there is a strong honeycomb structure yet. That's it for me. Thank you very much. And back over to you, David.
So Twee, that was great. I have to admit, I got the WHO budget wrong. I said it was 10% and 90%. And I mean, I think that these things are constantly going up and down, but it's really very important that everybody understands that this organization, the WHO, just really does not have anything like enough money to do all the things it's asked to do. And so it has to go around with its begging cap to ask for more. And that's what we call the extra budgetary or voluntary contributions, because the assessed contributions are just not enough. Tui, thank you for the quality of your questions. Do we give you a big round of applause to you or to Catherine or to both?
Team effort.
Right.
And actually, when we hear from Marianne that Marianne, the MDGs did include tuberculosis in addition to HIV and malaria. Thank you very much, Marianne.
Marianne, as always, I'm looking at you there. You can't, on Zoom, you can't tell whether you're really looking at somebody in the eye, but I'm looking at Marianne saying, right on, great, thank you. So there were a lot of comments and I think that, they're very varied. So first of all, Sarah Phillips, thank you for telling us that you're getting AstraZeneca. And I mean, I think there's quite a lot of people on who are not only are taking and going to use the AstraZeneca vaccine, but at least one of you I know was a volunteer in the clinical trials. And I really, I mean, I think we all thank you. I think the AstraZeneca vaccine is really important because of 4 degrees, because of cost. When you just compare it with the cost of Moderna or the cost of Pfizer and BioNTech, we're talking here about 30 times less or 25 times less. And we're talking about vaccine that can be kept in an ordinary fridge. So it's hugely important. And I must say, on the one hand, I think I'm pleased that so many experts did get into gear about 10 days ago and said, we're going to cause a moratorium or a suspension of the use of this vaccine while we check to see what's happened. I mean, that's right. That's paying attention to a worry about safety. It's what you should do. And then you review the data and you say, is it greater or less than what you expect? But then you always have that nagging suspicion that there's somebody just stirring it up. And there was at least one piece of fake news on this. There was a story of a class action suit from German lawyers against AstraZeneca, which, according to my informants, is definitely fake news. And so that's what's going to happen, is that on the back of a legitimate concern about a virus, there will be also about a vaccine, there's going to be all sorts of nonsense written, and that's going to be problematic. You know, this is going to be a rocky period over the next few months. There's a lot of malicious people messing it around. So thank you, Sarah, for telling us you're about to get it. It's good. To Maurizio Calderon. Maurizio, I'm going to read out what you've said, and then you lighten up and come in if you want to add to it. He says, a pandemic preparedness treaty, ! An opportunity for a true departure from the International Health Regulations 2005, because that did not translate into improved preparedness. And Maurizio is saying, I did some work in Africa on evaluating compliance with the International Health Regulations. And one of our conclusions is precisely that IHR 2005, that's the 2005 version of the current treaty called the International Health Regulations, did not translate into improved preparedness. So the idea is that the new treaty will attempt to go a lot further than the International Health Regulations. And at the heart of that is the question of, to what degree does an individual country have to give permission to WHO to come and investigate a suspicious incident associated with a possible infectious agent? If WHO has to ask permission and can be rejected and thrown out if its activities are not fully supported by the receiving country, then as far as the protagonists are concerned, that's just not good enough. And that's going to be the the great delicacy of negotiating, Maurizio. Thank you very much for saying what you said. Maurizio, where are you? I'm looking for you. Oh, I can't see.
I don't have a, hi, David.
Okay, did you want to say anything else about this, Maurizio?
Yes, I wanted to mention, first of all, apologies for the camera, it's not working. But I think that one of the important things is that if there is a true change in the lens in terms of going from the national lens for preparedness and response to the global lens of preparedness and response, that will truly open opportunities, because right now, and all of us, I think, have realized that pandemic response is only as strong as its weakest link. And that's something to remember. So if indeed, instead of, okay, every country is going to work on its own, and so on and so forth, and some of them don't really quite make it there, so let's be patient, and so, no. Let's, from a global perspective, and through enabled global and regional international authority and properly distributed wherewithal to truly operate, then let's change not only the framework, but also the true follow of the obtainance of outcomes. Because right now, what we have is a set of recommendations that ought to translate into a plan, and that ought to translate into a lab, and that ought to translate into some people maybe knowing about it. It is, and I apologize, because obviously lots of people have worked very strongly on this for years and years. It doesn't translate into proper practice change.
It's not fit for purpose, Maurizio.
Yes, exactly. So anyway,
as you say, it's based on the jurisdiction of individual national leaders just working on behalf of their citizens. And of course, the falsehood is that a citizen of Spain or India or Canada is actually only safe if citizens in all the world are safe in relation to a particular pathogen. It's your point at the beginning. And I think that what you've said, and I'm sure everybody else will agree with this, is that if there is a treaty, it's not a treaty for individual nations to keep themselves safe. It's a treaty for the safety of the world. It's a treaty that is founded on principles of equity. And that's why I personally have got quite excited about it. And Catherine, you're there somewhere, and I hope you will just unleash yourself and dive in if you want to talk about this. Don't wait for me to bring you in, just interrupt. Iman wanted to come in. Iman, could you're going to talk, I think, probably from your Sudanese perspective, but it could be the other. But tell us a bit, if you're going to talk, you'll have to explain just a tiny bit, what are the joint external evaluations and what are the national action plans for health security? Because
sure.
this is at the heart of things, but it's a big question to you. Have we messed up in the past because of that obsession with making everything focused around the nation rather than around the globe? Back to you, over to you.
Thank you very much, David, for the opportunity. I think there are many missed opportunities with the IHR, the International Health Regulations 2005. As a tool or an instrument of international law, there is a huge gap between the law itself and the implementation on the ground. And funny enough, it is supposed to ensure global health security, but the implementation is left to the countries. So I agree with you and Mauricio that the implementation at country level is left to national governments and it's not enforced. There is a systemic issue of the capacity of those countries to implement. There is no money, there is no capacity, there is need for training. So these are systemic issues that have to be addressed, but there is destroyed health systems, there is war, there is lots and lots of issues I can't even count. So with these existing challenges, it becomes difficult for countries to focus on this, and for even public health advocates, including the WHO, to make the case to the countries that this is a priority. Another thing is this law of international, this instrument of international law is not receiving as much pressure. For example, we carry out campaigns for countries to sign and implement other treaties like the Convention Against Torture or some solid instruments. But this one is seen as, oh, this is health, this is WHO, this is too technical, so it's not for everyone. And we need to change that mindset by rallying global citizens around the issue of health security. The last point I want to say is one of the items under the IHR says countries who are capable and have the capacity should help other countries. And this is what we are not seeing also. And the pandemic has shown us that this is not reality. We're not seeing rich countries helping poor countries. It is also left to charity, to goodwill, to us, the citizens campaigning, to us as dual citizens. We have been doing a lot of health diplomacy. Shall health diplomacy be left only to the public and to activists, or should it be brought into the mainstream and some obligation put on countries to fund countries that are capable to channel money towards the implementation of the IHR? And a last point is, in terms of training health workers and so on, I believe that we need to globalize that, to standardize on a global scale. Because there is a lot of disparity. Thank you.
No, I really hope so. I really want to pick up on what you've just said. You know, this needs to be global standard, one standard, not varied standards depending on the income level of the country. You just can't afford to skimp on basic public health capacity when you're dealing with these kinds of spillover pathogens. Totally agreed. And that was why the previous system built around the nation state, I think, was wrong. But Catherine, am I right? Catherine is both public health and law. Let's see what she has to say.
So I totally agree. You know, Iman, I think one of the things that's really hard about the international health regulations is they're unique in international law in being one of the only instruments that countries have to opt out of instead of opting into. So as a member of WHO, when the regulations were passed, unless there was a concerted effort not to be part of them, a treaty is different. Countries have to go through quite an elaborate process to adopt it and endorse it. And so having done that, you really integrate it into national law, and it changes the way a country behaves. And it supersedes things like political cycles because it's part of national legislation. And so it can't be undone by a next political cycle, a next president. So I think that, you know, ideally, as a lawyer, as a public health lawyer, I mean, a treaty is great. I do think it's going to take a tremendous amount of political capital. I see the comments here saying everybody has to be on board before it goes. But Aman, I think all your points are absolutely correct that, you know, it's impossible to enforce 194 different, you know, standards. And David, I think you're right. It's one of the things we tried to do with the emergency medical teams with Ian Norton was create standards that were uniform and replicated across all countries so that everybody had the same kind of capacities to respond. That's me.
And what's great, Catherine and Iman, is there's just a chance that there will be the sort of political will that's needed for an opt-in treaty that looks at a global issue. The parallels are things like the treaties on climate, you know, they're opt-in, and it makes a huge difference, really.
Yes.
Gosh, thank you both. Look, can I go to NK Seti? NK, if you can hear me, sorry, thank you. What's going on in?
Yes.
I was looking at the numbers today, and government is reporting an uptick in your numbers. And then a colleague was telling me from WHO New Delhi that this is mostly coming from places that didn't have it so badly last year. What's happening, if you can share? You may not want to, because once you've spoken, then I'd like to go to Jonathan Fitzsimmons, who had some comments. NK.
Yeah, thank you, David. Well, in India, the cases are increasing, but right at this stage, the maximum increase has occurred in one of the Western states, that's Maharashtra. Having said that, we also see an increase in other parts of the country. Like Kerala, we saw an increase, Punjab is seeing an increase, almost everywhere we are seeing an increase. Having said that, in areas where their increase wasn't so much earlier on, we have started seeing an increase there too. So on the whole, I believe it's the second surge. God knows where would the peak be. So that's the situation.
Well, I'm impressed that you're saying, even though you are the man you are, former member of the Planning Commission and so on, you're saying that it's difficult to fathom out where it will be. You and me are in the same place, NK. I'm having to be honest with everybody who asks me that I just don't know how big the peaks we're going to see across the world will be in a couple of months' time. And I think it's probably right that we should be I suppose modest about it, but I think what we all know is that it is going to come up again. And by the way, Sally, the third S was swirls and not swills. I just wanted to say that. I forgot to say it. NK, thank you very, very much. So I thought it would be nice to get Jonathan Fitzsimmons, who wants to make a comment, and we might not be able to answer it. Then Scott Knox, and then it'd be nice to get Chaim and Marianne. Let's see if we've got time. It's the usual effort to try to get a few people talking quickly. Jonathan, please.
Thanks, David. I'll be quick, I promise. And perhaps it was NK that might be better placed to answer it. My concern was that given the surge in India and the the volume of vaccine production that goes on in India, is this going to lead to the sort of vaccine hoarding in India that we're potentially seeing elsewhere? And is the surge in cases in India going to lead to a change in their vaccination policy, which is going to lead to further problems of worldwide supply?
Well, the answer is, of course. The Indian government has been incredibly generous and has given away, or in some cases sold, it's not all free, but has made available more than half of the production that's come from the Serum Institute of India, which is the collaboration with Oxford AstraZeneca. And now there is a decision inside India that because of the upsurge, they're going to really scale up immunization within the country. And that will mean less available for countries outside India. As you might have read also in the UK press, part of the UK planning, which I've been surprised about, is to get some of the Oxford AstraZeneca from India. And there is anxiety in the UK that they won't get as much as they were hoping for because India needs it. And that in turn means that India is trying to get vaccine from, that UK is trying to get vaccine from elsewhere. And that in turn is having other knock-on effects. So in summary, there's real competition for the relatively small number of doses that are available. There's also the usual phenomenon that I've said before, that you get bad batches from time to time, and everybody wants a bad batch to be thrown away. That's the right thing to do. And so you will occasionally get a lacuna in supply because of a bad batch. So altogether, it's never a certain supply. Yet at the same time, at lunchtime, listening to the other WHO envoys, there was a heartfelt plea from colleagues working in South Asia for greater clarity from COVAX on when vaccines are going to arrive, because they've got hundreds of thousands or millions of people waiting for their second dose of Oxford AstraZeneca, and they're super worried that they're not going to be able to give them their second dose at the time they want to give them. So you can feel how each time there's a problem, there's a knock-on effect, and the knock-on effects become worse and worse and worse, and there are frustrated people at the end of it, which often means frustrated people turning up to get their vaccine and not being able to get it. So Jonathan, absolutely right and understandable, quite honestly, in my view. I wanted to quickly go to Chime. Chime has just got a quick question. If people who have been vaccinated can still be carriers, can they infect people who are not vaccinated? That is the suspicion, yes. Of course, you know, you've been vaccinated, you get infected, you may not have such a heavy load of virus, so you might not be carrying the huge volumes that normally you might be. So perhaps you're less infectious, not known for sure, but yes, to the best of my knowledge at the moment, if you have been vaccinated, you can still carry, transmit, and infect others. Catherine, you'll tell me if I'm wrong. Scott Knox, in understanding that it is more likely that COVID-19 will be around long term, and that and that even with vaccines, they'll be challenging due to the variants. What is the long-term future of our situation? Humans, especially single people, can't physically distance forever. Absolutely, Scott. So let me just look into your eyes and tell you what I think is going to happen. I don't think we will need to be practicing the kind of movement restrictions and isolation that we see when you've got a lockdown or widespread movement restriction put in place. But I think we will be expected to be careful about physical distance in supermarkets, in workplaces, in recreation areas, especially when there is a risk of virus transmission because of spikes and surges. And I think we will be expected, as long as there's virus around, to wear face masks. I think if we get to a point where the virus drops down to infinitesimally low levels in a community, then we'll be able to be a little bit less fussy about the physical distance and a little bit less concerned about face masks. But if spikes start coming up again, then instructions will come to mask up and get your distance back. And I think that will happen. That will be the future of humanity until we reach a point where vaccines are produced that are capable of getting any kind of this coronavirus, however it mutates. And I was just hearing a week ago of a team that's around the Moderna company in the East Coast of New York. They are using artificial intelligence to look at all the possible mutations on the spike protein in order to try to develop a composite vaccine that they believe would be able to get any mutation that occurs, using a modern technology called CRISPR, which is where you can do very, very precise gene editing. And this is new science. It's the kind of science that's being used to treat different kinds of cancer. And that's going to be the science that will be used to develop the vaccines of the future that I believe will enable humanity to come out of this. Scott, I haven't answered your point. I don't want to make you despondent. This is not meant to be like that. John Atkinson, last words from you, then Tutui and Sally Pring, and then we close.
Just quickly, David, I'd say as we move on through this pandemic, time matters. At any point in time, we see particular things, but we're still at really quite an early point in some respects. And at this point, I found it very helpful to go back to July last year and something you wrote with a couple of colleagues from Singapore about, well, how will we know when a place is safe to do the sorts of things you were talking about? And that's well worth revisiting and maybe something we might pick up at a future time.
Thanks very much, John. And and it was with a colleague called Dale Fisher and YYT, another colleague of his. It was published in The Lancet. We might, in the next briefing, make it available, and also for the WhatsApp group, I'll make sure that the URL is there. It's short paper, and it's so relevant to now. It's what capacities do you need to have in society to be able to deal with spikes and surges, and still at the same time to have life going, not as normal, but as close to normal as you can make it. Thank you very much indeed. Back to Twee for Sally, and then we'll close. Twee?
Thank you very much for joining us today while I share Sally's beautiful illustration. To remind you, we do have our LinkedIn community chat, so let's keep the conversation going there. Sign up to our newsletter if you haven't already. I send out a newsletter a couple hours before our session. We'll be back here at 8 a.m. Central European time next Friday. And based on the great turnout today, we will keep these Friday afternoon sessions at 5 p.m. Central European time. They're scheduled until the end of April for Series 3, with a little break for Good Friday, that Easter weekend. But Sally, would you like to share any words? And then back to David for the goodbyes and smiles.
I think I'll pass it back to the boss man. I think he's more qualified than me.
Well, I'm going to have to say, Sally, I love it seeing the different things in there. The seesaw, I think that's lovely. And act slow takes you into the seesaw. Certainly that's probably all the words you need to describe some of the challenges in Western Europe. Variants will escape the vaccine, spike surges and swells. Everybody, love this piece of work from Sally. It's just great.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Now, yeah, the last moment, video's off if you can do it. Just say hello to everybody. Thank you all for joining. We need to link arms. We can't easily do it on Zoom, and just stick together over the coming weeks and months, because unless we are amazingly lucky, we're going to have some tough moments, especially as the surges come up again. So let's just keep holding together and finding the good, because it's the good that will help us all come through.